Okay. Hi, everyone. I think if you're here with us now, you're welcome to grill Paul, Diego, and I on anything that was discussed in the panel.
Or which was not.
Or which was not. Exactly,
it's not clear that there's actually anybody here.
Oh, okay.
Oh no, Damien Smith and 12 others entered the session.
Hello. Yeah. Aha. Yes.
Oh, there
okay.
are
Yeah. So you can see us in the chat. So yeah, in that chat, hopefully everyone can see that there. Paul and Diego kindly provided some links. So there's links there to some of the things that Paul and Diego mentioned and some that they didn't mention. And I suspect if anything comes up, they'll be able to go back and refer to those links and say, yeah, follow that link. So we don't need to watch Diego act out an immersive experience.
I don't know. I think there's a decent argument for all immersive experiences to be acted out by mime first. If you can't describe it by mime, you probably shouldn't make it.
Yeah, so I think if there are any questions or comments or suggestions or invitations to more discussion, you're welcome to post those into this space.
Is there any way for non-academic to get access to the? Let me just have a little look. I think the answer is probably yes. Hold on. It should be, because University of Nottingham's committed to open access. So bear with me a second. I'll see what I can find.
While you're doing that, Damien's asked about partnerships with institutions. Do you mean with academic institutions? Yeah, that's always a pain. Isn't it? Yeah, so exactly. So in the UK, it's always quite challenging, I think, anyway. I think developing partnerships with Chinese academic institutions has got its own issues as well. So I'm not sure if it's the Chinese institutions or just even internally in the UK that you're interested in, Damien.
So in our case, it was sheer luck, because so I just got to meet Fred is my partner in China, and it was just during a trip, and like we started chatting. Like he's been developing like artistic exhibitions, but always kind of on the very technological end of what you can expect from an artist. They were creating displacing fountains and doing touch interaction with the water itself. You know, I was quite interested in what he was telling me. And then just a couple of days later, we saw the call. I was like, because I mean, we have been chatting, saying, "Hey, it'd be great, you know, if we can, if we could use this to make artistic exhibitions, to do that, to do it. Yeah, it's gonna be a nightmare, like you there, me here, and then we saw the partnership Canada. Okay, so in my case, it was just sheer luck. It's not like I have a huge network of contacts over in China. It is really hard. Yeah.
So I think I could speak for the UK institutions first. I guess there's a bit degree of similarity, but the bigger the university, I think often the harder it is to access. So I can speak personally from the point of view of an institution like Abertay, which is kind of micro institution, I guess, in the grand scheme of things. I mean, for context, we're a university of around 4,000 students, which makes us quite small in the UK. But I think also a little bit accessible. So in terms of partnerships with industry, is something we tend to focus on anyway. And that could be everything from quite small scale. So obviously we're games and interactive media focused. So if we're looking to do a collaboration with someone like yourself, Damien, it might be along the lines of something small, entry level, a pilot study in the first instance, which might involve a student project, which honestly is really quite flexible. We don't need to go up to the higher levels of agreements and what have you. It could be more of an informal interaction in the first instance to build something. I mean, all of our teaching at Abertay is quite well structured to allow for that kind of experience. I think that's something that a lot of institutions do, I guess, but that's something we focus on. But it scales up from there as well, of course. So increasingly what we're doing is moving towards applying for funding collaboratively. Obviously, schemes like the Audience of the Future more recently has allowed us to explore that in different ways, because some of the calls could be industry-led, others are academic-led, or university-led, rather. So yeah, I think in my instance, I think quite often a lot of the partnerships just actually emerge through picking up the phone or an email to someone like myself, and then exploring how we could do things with exploring how we could do things with a student project or a small project in the first instance, and that often gives us a leg up to doing something a bit more formal. So we've applied for funding, including HRC funding, for instance, with industry partners before, where that money is split in different ways depending on the scheme. But in all instances, the partnership has emerged mostly through a kind of informal coming together of people, and I think particularly that's useful if I guess in a lot of institutions, it's the academics themselves are the ones that maybe have more of that insight into how things work in industry.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
yeah.
From the perspective of the MRL and where I work, our partnerships emerge through a whole range of different activities we do. So a lot of our partnerships are with artists. So a lot of them emerge by partly kind of word of mouth, but we have a number of schemes for supporting artists in residence in the lab. We work with a number of different kind of artist groups to help connect us to them. And that, of course, then leads to kind of venue connections as well. So if you work with a particular artist, you end up then looking to exhibit that work. So you end up working with venues, and then you've got venues as partners on board. And we make use of, we have a large group within Nottingham called Horizon, which is a very industry focused technology group, which we kind of draw on its connections quite a lot. We've got long-standing, one of the kind of advantages to being the MRL is that we've been around for 20 years, so we've got quite a long history with lots of different institutions, including, you know, everyone from the BBC to really local groups. And we try very hard to maintain those connections as well as possible. But we're also very open to essentially randomly receiving emails saying, hey, we've seen your work, we want to talk to you about it. So that's how my relationship with Matt Collishaw started, who I've now worked with on a number of projects. So that's what that was Thresholds. And that came out of him sending me an email saying, hey, I saw some of the work you did on this other project. I've got this idea. Are you interested in talking about it? And so for me, I think it's really important to just be open as academics to creatives coming to us and saying, you know, hey, I've seen this stuff you've been doing. I've got an idea to work with it. And particularly that makes it important for us to put our work out there. So I maintain a relatively out-of-date blog, which I try to put most of the things I do on there, partly as an exercise in record keeping and partly as a kind of visible, this is the stuff I do. And from that, I've had a number of kind of inquiries from different artists, because I do such a variety of different things, because my work's driven by the artists a lot of the time. So yeah, for me, I think it's kind of important for us as academics to offer ourselves out there, and then it's for us to be receptive to creatives and other people coming to ask us how to use our toys.
Yeah, I think that's quite the key over here, and I think it kind of also connects from the question from Phil Carlisle. Probably I said that wrong. Sorry, Phil. So he says how he's a technology that wants to enable new creative content. It's hard to just break that divide between technology and creative. And much of it is like being open to anyone approaching you. The other bit of it is being actually proactive. So something that worked quite well for us in the past was just enrolling into any kind of exhibition we could. Like there was, I remember in Bristol, there was Venture Fest, in which you could just have like your demo booth to show whatever you have in mind. And many times, whatever you're going to show, it's going to be whatever comes to your mind. But it is a great opportunity to just get people to see it and start getting feedback. And we've had many opportunities arising from those things, but it is in a way unrewarding. I mean, this is hard to say, okay? Like it is not incentivized. by universities or anything like that. As an academic, all the hours that you're going to put in creating that demo, all the hours you're going to put in creating that content, like that's going to be on you, largely. Unless, well, I'm also in a faculty of engineering. Maybe in other faculties there is more, I don't know. But in our case, that's things that you do because you want to just reach out. But many times that's something that
I mean, I would echo that kind of embracing interdisciplinarity really does help. So I work a lot with English department. I work a lot with theatre. I work a lot with history, and I often draw on. We work with music a lot, so I often draw on other academics in my institution to find routes to applying my work, because I think computer science for computer science's sake isn't very. It doesn't get me going. It doesn't keep me excited. But computer science, when it's enabling really interesting stuff. I mean, mathematicians say the same thing, right? Maths is, what's the line? Maths is both the queen and the servant of the sciences, right? So it's in and of itself, it's really cool, but it's when it gets used to do other stuff, it's really exciting. And I feel kind of the same way about particularly our field of much as I dislike the idea, I'm going to use the word immersive tech again anyway. But so yeah, particularly our field, I think, has got a lot to offer other fields, and I think it's just a matter of finding your way into those, finding routes into those other fields, whether that's artists, whether that's other academics, or whether that's through your own creativeness. I think we should never be afraid to just make stuff ourselves. You know, there's a certain imposter syndrome-esque thing with art in particular, where you kind of feel like unless an artist says you're an artist, you're not an artist. But sometimes I think it's okay to just make stuff and put it out there and you know, get a local venue involved and get some people to see it. And whether you're making a game and getting some people to play with it, whether you're making a museum piece and getting people to look at it. So that I talked earlier on about our Holocaust project, The Eye as Witness. That didn't have an artist involved. That was just, I had this idea about walking into photographs. And so I decided to make a prototype of it, and then I got various people involved, and then we got the National Holocaust Centre involved, and then it grew into this touring show. But it doesn't have a driving artist. That was just, well, I've got an idea and I want to exploit it.
Another one that could be maybe worth also highlighting, it's maybe kind of obvious, but videos, online videos. You need to work on that visibility you get out there.
Every post on my blog's got an associated video, and it takes time to make them, but it definitely helps.
But it is, I mean, if we were saying about exhibitions, how that's not so maybe rewarding, it can be, you know, but investing in developing that video a little more, it can pay back a lot. It can really pay back a lot. And many times when you just approach somebody and you start telling them like, I can do this, I can do that, they're gonna be, but you just saw it, this is what I do. They're gonna be, okay, I get it, you know. And that's, that's another obvious kind of one.
I think that hopefully answers your question, Phil, the original question there. I think just to touch on, because I think Damien had asked about Chinese institutions as well earlier, I think the same thing's going to go there. I think with all our projects, we're trying to build those Chinese academic networks as well ourselves. Some sort of established, others, I guess, growing and a little bit impacted by what's happening just now. But I think the same thing goes if you're wanting to kind of grow those academic connections. I think for the most part, contacting any academic at a university that's the right person, you know, finding their bio on their website and contacting them. Most academics, my experience, are quite happy to try and help make those connections and get you to the right person. So if
I mean, actually, this is being a challenge to UKRI itself, right? So this is something that's happening kind of internally within our cohort of projects, that they want to create a hub just to facilitate this kind of exchanges between UK and Shanghai. So it is, I mean, and we are talking UKRI, which is on top of EPSRC, AHRC, everyone. And it does take an effort at that level to really have something flowing, because it is not only about reaching out and getting the initial idea. Like then there are going to be issues around legislation, how to commercialize. Like there are many issues that you need to navigate when you target China, particularly. But I mean, like it takes commitment from both ends, and it's good that they are working at the higher level, but we need to. The only thing you can do, honestly, is to try and create those opportunities and that visibility.
Yeah,
it is a hard one. It is a really hard one.
So David's got a question there as well about the opportunities, I guess, with interacting with Chinese partners and looking at ways that Chinese art might influence. I think this kind of came up in our panel as well, where I was sort of suggesting, is there something more about the creative process, and that's more the opportunity, disruptive thinking about how we make immersive experiences. I mean, are you aware of anything or thinking about anything from Chinese art that might influence the way you're working?
So this came up in a conversation that I was having in a project meeting this morning, actually, is because we've been thinking about, we're working particularly with Shanghai Museum and the Tate in London, and thinking about where the kind of similarities and divergences lie between the two different collections, and trying quite hard to kind of plot out what a connected experience between those two might be. And we were thinking in particular about landscapes today, and just talking about the differences in the way, the different kind of aesthetics and the different kind of approaches to painting and the different kind of cultural history associated with landscapes from those two different museums. And there were a few things that kind of came up. So one is the fact that there's not a kind of all Chinese museums and all Chinese art has this aesthetic, and all British museums and all British art have this aesthetic. They're hugely different. You know, if you look at the difference between the Science Museum and the Tate just in London, they're pretty next to each other, but they're wildly kind of different experiences when you go in there. And the same is absolutely true when you go to Shanghai, and you go between Shanghai Museum and Shanghai Technical Museum are two completely different experiences, and they're curated in completely different ways, and the art is presented in completely different ways. That said, there are some quite rigid traditional aesthetics in Chinese art, and there are in British art. And so we were kind of interested in looking particularly to take some known styles. So I've seen the Along the River work, and I think it's absolutely beautiful. There are some quite classical styles that I'm kind of interested in whether or not you can adopt the aesthetic from. So one of the ideas that I've been toying around with, which I thought would be really interesting, was could you take the subject matter of a British picture, a famous British painting, like, I don't know, the Hay Wain or something, and then redraw that using a traditional Chinese style, and then do the reverse, where you take a traditional famous Chinese image, like, for example, Along the River, and then redraw that using a traditional British style. And I kind of love the idea of that crossover of keeping the subject matter of one location and applying the aesthetic of the other onto that, and vice versa. Whether that will ever get done is another question entirely, but it's an idea that's been kicking around my head. So I'm not sure if that actually answers David's question or just rambles around the topic.
I think rambling answers are good. I mean, we are doing something similar in that, we're working with one of our smaller partners, or one of our new partnerships in China is actually in Wuhan. And we're really interested in, and so are they actually, of exploring the culture of Wuhan, particularly at this time when there's this, I guess, negative perception, and it's overshadowing the cultural offering and the uniqueness of the culture in Wuhan. So the idea of bringing them, partnering up with a UK company and actually getting them involved in co-production to see where some of that cultural crossover could impact on, not just on creativity and how we make, in our case, games, but within the wider portfolio of immersive, I guess. But also to try and bring some cultural aesthetics of not just in China, but of Wuhan and the province in particular, and shining a light on that. I think it's really important to us. But also, in the context of my work, is obviously more to do with play. So I'm really interested in concepts of play. So my background is obviously working on play in the UK. So even just looking at examples of playground games, that kids play in the UK, and the culture of that influences a lot about how we think about play. I'd be really interested to see how concepts of play that are beyond the digital in China can influence our way about thinking about those more performative-based art forms that you get in games. I don't know if there was another question that I'd missed after that, but hopefully that addresses that question there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. I think you do see that, especially in if I speak to my own field of games, you see games tend to take influences from a lot of different places. So one of my bugbears, I guess, trying to teach games to game students is getting them to appreciate the fact that some of the most innovative games and game concepts, whether they're visual explorations of space, playful paintings, or different ways of engaging story or narrative or with culture. So many of the influences on how we design, develop games come from without, not just out with games, but out with the kind of the particular culture that those students might be coming from. So yeah, really key to how we develop new game experiences.
Yeah, I mean, there's a long-standing kind of discussion in games that I think is really interesting about it's a kind of ludology, narratology, kind of context point. And when you kind of analyze some of the most interesting games, they tend to be the ones that don't sit in the middle, but absolutely sit on the corners of that. So a game where somebody has come up with an absolutely fascinating mechanic and builds around that, and it sort of doesn't matter what the game's about. Those are wonderful. I mean, Tetris, right? That's kind of some of those wonderful games of that, and similarly, those which are telling you a wonderful story are great. And I think your point is your point about a context, about a specific kind of aesthetic being a driver for a game idea is really interesting. And it's I think when we set out to make games and playful experiences, we shouldn't be setting out to make a game or a playful experience. We should be setting out to do something with it. We're setting out to engage people in some way with some content or with some story or with some mechanics. It's not just about delivering. I guess this is a kind of real challenge with working with industry, I think, which is industry kind of expects us to say we're going to make a game and it will be great. And we, as academics and researchers, we tend to go, well, no, what we want to do is create something that's going to get you thinking about this, or it's going to get you doing this, or it's going to get you engaging with this topic. We do a lot of the games that I build are kind of engagement activities. So they're like, okay, I'm going to give you a game to play, which is going to engage you with a specific topic. So I did one with trying to engage people with sea turtle conservation a few years ago, which we took to bizarrely took to Greek music festivals. And that was about basically we shot this game which had a specific narrative associated with it, which was all about getting people to engage with the idea that beach parties and sea turtles don't really mix. But when we sold it to the the festivals, we sold it as, hey, here's a great fun game for people to play as part of the festival, and they're going to feel really good, and they're going to be jumping around, and it's a weird activity of like you have a research agenda that you want to push forward, but you have to sell it, and I think games are a great way to do that.
Yeah, and that comment you've got there about the negative energy or the negative side to games rather than draining energy, I think so it's something we're very conscious of as well in making short playful experiences, but also I guess thinking about the affordances of play, because we do a lot of work on Aberdeen on site-specific play, which I guess is where the overlap is between all of our projects, and this idea of creating experiences for people that they encounter in museums and galleries or out in the wild. And then this idea of getting people to engage with play is one of the most challenging things, because I think people naturally have these kind of inhibitions about playing. A lot of people love to spectate and watch play as well, which I think you've got to really appreciate that. I guess that relates to things like esports too. But there is certainly a culture of spectatorship of play that is really healthy, and I think we shouldn't kind of avoid that. People like to watch others playing things. There's a reward in that in itself,
and not just play, but experiencing things.
Exactly, yeah.
The whole this idea that when you're, and just to go back to the VR thing, when you're in VR, you're kind of like solitary. You're not. There's other people in the room with you, and the experience is something for them as well. I once talked to a dance choreographer about building a VR system, which would essentially people would be playing a VR game, and the game was designed to make them dance as a group in a particular way so that an audience would see the VR people dancing, even though the VR people didn't know they were dancing. And it's like slightly ethically unsound, but I thought really interesting. And you know, this thing about the stuff about the spectator experience seems really important to me, seems really relevant to me. That was part of Matt's work with Thresholds, was like, what do you look like as a person in this if you're somebody who's watching it? Because a lot of these things require cueing, and they require like, you know, visibility. So yeah, I think you're so right about spectators being a fundamental part of the activity.
I remember I had a student of mine. This was just for a final student project. He wanted to sort of translate the concept of a tabletop role-playing game, okay, to VR, with the idea of creating kind of an asymmetric experience. So the player is in VR headset, like seeing like whatever, you know, like the monsters, the environment, and all of that. And the dungeon master, okay, he was there with a tablet controlling like spawning people and all of that, you know. But if the player was walking into a creep, he could sort of creep towards the back of the player and go like, if he wanted the player to go into a throne room or to take a chair or whatever, he could just like place the prop over there. And it was hilarious, you know, like, I mean, you cannot really expect much from this kind of project. It was working, but it was so much fun.
When I was talking about magic earlier on, that was sort of some of the stuff I was thinking about is just this opportunity for people to come in and insert props and insert kind of like, yeah, breathe on you. We did right back when we got the first Rift DK1s, and we were trying to encourage people to re-engage with VR because they'd heard of it again. I mean, I've been doing VR for a long time, even before that, but the DK1 was that kind of like visible VR again. And so one of the things we did was to kind of take the early Citadel roller coaster and put people on it and get them going. And then once they put the headset on, I would kind of get a fan and blow some air on them as the roller coaster was moving. And I control the fan based, because I knew the kind of what the roller coaster did and I could see it on the screen. I could control the fan based on what they were doing. So like if it was stopped, it was off, and then it just turned it on. It's such a simple little addition. But for me, that was kind of like saying, yeah, look, extra sensory stuff. It doesn't just have to be what's in the headset. You can add extra senses and it makes it more interesting. And I don't need a fancy machine to do that because you've got a blindfold on. I can just stand in front of you and turn on a desk fan.
Yeah. No, and even for me, this case of the Dungeons and Dragons was really great, you know, because it's a game that's meant to be played with friends anyways, that you have some confidence. And then it was like, with people who had confidence, you could see them like, the player was fighting a goblin or whatever, and the dungeon master would be poking them, you know. And it was funny. It was really funny, and you could see both of them enjoying, you know. And it had this social aspect of the VR, and sort of for the dungeon master, sort of being hiding around, not visible in VR, but still engaging with him. It worked just so well. And there is a lot of that. Like, it's not only the tech, it's what you make of it. And in the end, if the purpose is a game, like, game has to be fun.
We find play in the technology, though, don't we? I was just thinking about that roller coaster. That's not a game, but it's, you know, there was a playful experience going on there. I was poking people and I was shaking the chair and pointing the fan at them, and that was me playing with people. And I think there's an opportunity to find play in any kind of engaging piece of tech.
Yeah.
I definitely can imagine people playing with your bubbles that we were talking about earlier on, and like wafting them around and popping them and stuff.
Diego, there's a question there for you as well, I think, on particle-based displays, which you might want to come into.
Whoa! What are the next steps for particle-based displays? Yeah. We are going insane, to be honest. So, like these, I mean, we've been working with levitation and ultrasound for a long time, okay? But only in 2019 we got to do the first example of these high-speed moving particles to create volumetric content. Ever since, we have moved forward like a lot. Like in that first example, we were only using a single particle. Like already a few months ago, we published a paper that we can now do it with several particles, and that's important because before we were only using a trap, but that poor trap, we were updating it very quickly. But if you wanted to create something visual over here and something tactile over there, you would use it there for a few cycles, and then here to tickle your finger, and over there, and that poor trap was really busy. While now using several at the same time, we can really use the power from the device a lot better. But then we are working, I mean, I'm going to be talking about many of these challenges in my talk later today at 3 or 10 past 3. Check the program, I might be wrong. But I will be there. But things that are hard, like, and this happened to us when we started actually working with the artists. Like the artists, when they want to create some content in the middle of the air, the only thing that they care about is the shape. I want to create this flower. I want to create this shape of a butterfly, like whatever. Okay. Now, for our algorithms to work, you need to specify for each position of the path the 3D coordinates, which are the shape. Okay, fair enough. You can get that from Unity. You also need to describe the timing, because the device can apply certain accelerations. So depending on the timing that you give to each position, that influences the maximum acceleration you're applying. You need to be aware of what is the maximum acceleration of my device. I don't know. So all of a sudden, to create just some stupid content, it is very involved. You need to understand the device, the physics, like, and largely, like for people, it's like, I don't care. I just want to see this, you know? So those are things that we are working on too. And it's an interesting one because you got to be playing with, the physical properties of the traps and the capabilities of the device and what the designer wants. And then we have a long way to go in so many things. Like with the way you define the content and all of that, we are integrating all of that into Unity, and I think we are making it a lot easier than where we were just a year ago. But then still, like, we want to go and support larger setups, because something that's quite peculiar about our device right now, it is a 16 by 16 centimeter device. It's like this big, a square shape, like sort of that big, okay? We can apply accelerations that are crazy, okay? But you can only accelerate for 8 centimeters, and then you rather decelerate in the other 8 centimeters, because otherwise you're leaving the navigator. So it's like having a Ferrari and having a road ahead of you of 10 meters. You're not going to go very fast. So one of the challenges we are going for is actually scaling up. And scaling up, it's going to be a challenge on its own, because the challenge for our device, we need to compute the fields very quickly, 10,000 times per second. And if you have more and more transducers, it gets tricky. So we have a lot of things to do, but if we manage to knock that wall, all of a sudden you have a larger space, you can accelerate more. In the end, the longer you can keep accelerating, the higher the velocities you can get, and that scales quadratically. So it is a very big step for us. And I don't know, we just keep finding things along the way. So we have plenty to do, like really plenty to do.
Yeah, I guess going to your talk's the best thing to do to figure out what's happening next. We're almost at the end of the Q&A. I'm not sure how much time. We've got about 3 minutes. There we go. So I thought maybe one of the last things to touch on, just because we're part of Creative China, and that this is probably also a Pandora's box, right? What do you think are going to be the main challenges technologically in trying to work with building or installing, creating installations in China with Chinese partners? Considering some of the stuff we're looking at is kind of it's highly experimental. Do you foresee any challenges, and how are you going to try and overcome those? Sorry to open that Pandora's box and say you've got 3 minutes to solve this.
I mean, so for me, one of the big ones will be the working across the time difference. So not just kind of logistically, but also then if you're going to deliver some kind of simultaneous shared experience, how do you share when people are visiting at two completely different times. And it means that we have to start thinking about traces, about histories, about kind of time compression, and all these kind of real challenges about how you make something feel populous when there's maybe nobody there because they're currently asleep or having dinner or whatever. And I think that's true generally and it's something we're having to explore now as we take everything online anyway. But I think it's particularly true if you're working with the other side of the world. So that for me is going to be a big one. I think another one is just we have very different, certainly from our experiences of the project so far, our institutions have very different ways of working to the institutions in China in terms of preparation for a project. So we might spend quite a lot of time kicking ideas around and in quite sort of like, yeah, we're going to do this, but we don't really know what it is yet. And it's very kind of open and brainstorming and ready for discussion, and kind of establishing that we're going to do something, but not really knowing what it is for a while. And that doesn't seem to sit well with the Chinese institutions that we've worked with so far. What we're finding that they tend to like a concrete proposal. And I think that's really interesting kind of cultural difference in terms of decision making. So we'll make a decision on a lot less information, that we're going to do something and then fill the information in later. And our Chinese partners tend to be absolute clarity on what a thing is going to be, even if we then still work out some details later before any decisions can be made. And I think that kind of managerial challenge is quite a difficult one for us to work with, particularly when we work with these kind of really crazy creative processes.
Like we hit, I mean, there are some differences because our exhibitions do not have to, they are not remote, like they are meant to be physical. You go there and you see the displays into action. But then we are having lots of issues with export controls, because you start saying in the box, it's got electronics, and what is it? Like phased array of transducers. Is that a radar? Can you use it for military purposes? Can you kill a drug? Like, I don't know. Like, no, guys, look, I make butterflies and shit. And it is like a very peculiar one. And then, like, in our case, we really need to develop a strong partnership because we are planning to have some trips over there to help with deployment and whatever, but largely it's going to be on our partners to create that exhibition, and having a close connection is going to be important from like the first stage in which they are working with the concept. They need to understand what's possible and what's not possible, just as not go head first into a war. But then, like, while we can support them in developing or refining, or like they're going to be doing lots of that on their own, and that's also part of what we want to explore. We don't want to be the ones doing everything. If this technology is ever going to make it out there, we have to make it simple enough so that others can do it. And we have picked some artists that are quite technical. So if these guys cannot do it, we are in trouble, you know, like no one will. So that's also going to be a challenge, like in keeping that working. But I don't know, I guess we'll figure it out as time.
We're all going to find out, I guess. So I think that's our time up.